Okay, I'm Joan Edwards in the biology department at Williams College. I'm a field biologist, so I study organisms in their natural environment, and I teach courses that also relate to organisms in their natural environment. And one thing that has become increasingly important in my teaching is visual learning, actually showing things to students directly in the field or showing images in the lab. All these things seem to be really important. And one of the things that I've learned through the years that I've been teaching, particularly the field botany course, is that students tell me often whether or not they're visual learners. They say, I can really learn this stuff in this class because it's a visual learning class. You're teaching my eye to see things. I learn things by seeing them. And this course does that, and I can really resonate with that. It's a really excellent way to learn. So teaching things visually is important to me. I'll give you a quick example from a botany class. And in botany, you would not believe the number of words there are for hairy. There's hirsute, hirtellus, hoary, all sorts of different words, and each has a verbal description for the term. But it's really, really hard to distinguish verbally between all the different kinds of hairiness that you might have in a plant. But if you can just show a student, oh, this is what a hoary plant is, this is what a hirtellus plant is, they know, they get it instantly. So if you can just show them, it makes it really work. The other area where visualization is extremely important is in my research. My research often focuses on noticing the unexpected and then turning that into a research project. And one very exciting finding was about 6 years ago, a student and I were in the field, and we were looking at this very common plant that grew all around my cabin. I've been looking at this plant for years. But the student went and looked very closely at the plant, and the plant was Canada dogwood, so it's a ground-growing dogwood. She stuck her nose down into a little patch, and something went poof, and she said something went poof, and I had not known that this plant would ever go poof. And so we looked at it very closely under a dissecting microscope, and we found this beautifully designed plant where the flowers had 4 petals that just came together and held together barely at the tips. And then one of the petals had a little trigger on it, and when pollinators came by and hit the trigger, the whole flower would just explode open. It was just really very dramatic, and it would throw the pollen up into the air. So we turned this into a research project by looking at how the plant did it, how fast it did it, and why it did it. And we teamed together with a physicist in the physics department at Williams, Dwight Whitaker, who could tell us the biophysics of it. We then got a very, very high-speed camera, and we filmed it at 10,000 frames per second. And we were able to show that this flower opened in less than half a millisecond. So that's if you take a second, divide it into 1,000 units, and then take one of those thousandths of a unit second and divide it in half. The whole flower blooms within that time period, earning this flower, by the way, a record in the Guinness Book of World Records for the fastest opening flower, which is really quite incredible. But the other thing we were able to do by slowing the action down using high-speed video and observing very carefully what this flower did is that we could determine the speeds at which it threw the pollen into the air. And we determined that the pollen is accelerated at 22 Gs, which is phenomenal, because if you think of an astronaut going up in a space shuttle, they're only subjected to 3 Gs. So these tiny little pollen grains are being subjected to a very high G level as they're being thrown up into the air. And of course, the pollen then gets carried by the wind and can get carried to the next flower, but also it gets thrown onto the insect that visits it and gets really impacted on the insect, so the insect can then also carry it to the next plant. So visual learning turns out to be really important and just a critical tool in teaching the kind of biology that I teach, both getting through to those students that have the talent to pick things up visually, and by training their eye, they can see new things and make new discoveries and add to our understanding of the natural world.